East, a region long defined by shadows and proxy wars, has just been thrust into the blinding light of a total confrontation. On the morning of Saturday, February 28, 2026, a date that will forever be etched in the annals of modern warfare, the geopolitical landscape was irrevocably altered. Operation Roaring Lion, a name that echoes with biblical gravity, was not just a strike, it was a surgical removal of an entire ruling apparatus. 200 Israeli fighter jets, a formation of unprecedented scale in the history of the Israeli Air Force, took to the skies in full coordination with the United States military under the banner of Operation Epic Fury. While the world was beginning its weekend, 500 targets across western and central Iran were simultaneously engulfed in fire. The objective was clear and uncompromising: political decapitation. The Supreme Leader compound in downtown Tehran, a fortress of absolute power for over 3 decades, was reduced to smoldering rubble by 30 precision munitions. Israeli intelligence, penetrating the deepest layers of the regime, had identified a target of opportunity that could not be ignored. A meeting of the highest echelon of Iranian power was underway in broad daylight, a time when the regime felt most secure from the usual cover of night attacks. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the 86-year-old cleric who served as the superglue of the Islamic Republic since 1989, was confirmed dead alongside his senior military and political inner circle. The Iranian chief of staff, the defense minister, and the commander of the Revolutionary Guards were all eliminated in a single, devastating morning. This earthquake of an event followed weeks of a staggering military buildup in the region, the largest since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Despite a final, frantic round of indirect nuclear talks in Geneva involving special envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, diplomacy had reached a terminal dead end. United States officials reported that Iran had rejected every core demand, including the dismantling of its most secretive enrichment facilities. With the diplomatic track cast aside, the Trump administration and the Israeli government chose to move from pressure tactics to execution. President Donald Trump, monitoring the operation from Mar-a-Lago, heralded the moment as a generational chance for the Iranian people to reclaim their government. He declared that the hour of their freedom was at hand, urging them to stay sheltered until the bombing ceased and then rise up to fill the vacuum of power. However, as the smoke rose over Tehran, the silence of the initial shock was quickly replaced by the roar of a massive retaliatory response. The head of the snake may have been severed, but the body of the regime was already lashing out with a fury that threatened to engulf every capital in the Gulf. This was not a performative exchange. It was a desperate multi-front counterattack. Within hours, sirens blared across Israel as a barrage of ballistic missiles and attack drones crossed the border. Millions of Israelis were sent into bomb shelters as the Iron Dome and Arrow defense systems worked overtime to intercept the incoming fire. But the retaliation did not stop at the borders of Israel. Iran, lashing out indiscriminately, targeted United States assets and hosting nations across the entire Middle East, turning the Persian Gulf into a front line of a war that has no clear off-ramp. The retaliatory wave, titled True Promise 4 by the remnants of the Iranian command, was designed to prove that the Islamic Republic could still strike from the grave. This was no longer a localized conflict. It was a regional conflagration involving 6 Arab nations and Israel simultaneously. In the United Arab Emirates, the illusion of a tranquil oasis was shattered when 137 ballistic missiles and over 209 drones were launched toward the Federation. In Abu Dhabi, 5 rapid explosions rocked the Cornwall district, vibrating windows for miles and resulting in the first confirmed foreign fatality, a Pakistani national killed by falling missile debris. Even the global commerce hub of Dubai was not spared, as the iconic Fairmont the Palm Hotel caught fire after being struck by what officials believe was debris from a successful interception. Tourists, who had come for the winter sun, found themselves rushing to parking lots and seeking shelter as smoke rose from the Palm Jumeirah. The scope of the Iranian response reached deep into the strategic heart of the American presence in the Middle East. Qatar, home to the Al Udeid Air Base and the forward headquarters of United States Central Command, was targeted with at least 65 missiles since the onset of the hostilities. In Bahrain, the Jufair district, which houses the United States Navy Fifth Fleet, sustained direct hits that forced emergency evacuations and left residents in a state of terror. Even as the United States and Israel claimed air superiority was imminent, the Iranian arsenal proved it possessed a saturation doctrine designed to overwhelm even the most sophisticated defense systems. This was the axis of resistance, lashing out with its final, most potent levers, including the immediate closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This vital artery, which handles approximately 20% of the world's oil supply, became a primary weapon of economic warfare. As the military exchanges intensified, The human cost began to mount in ways that narratives of deterrence could not hide. In the southern Iranian town of Minab, a girls' primary school was struck during active morning classes. Early reports suggested that at least 108 children were killed, with many more buried under the rubble of a structure that was either targeted or hit by a stray missile. This tragedy, combined with the reports of over 200 people dead across 24 of Iran's 31 provinces, has created a volatile emotional landscape. While some Iranians celebrated the fall of a tyrant, others expressed a raw fury that the price of their liberation was being paid in the blood of their children. The world is now watching a humanitarian failure unfold in real time, as oil markets go into shock and the threat of a global energy crisis looms over every decision made in the coming 72 hours. Behind the fortified walls of the Pentagon and the high-security bunkers of the Kiryat in Tel Aviv, the execution of this mission was the chilling culmination of 15 years of singular, unblinking focus. A lone analyst at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency spent over a decade studying one specific ventilation shaft at the Fordo nuclear facility, meticulously mapping its geology and environmental signatures to solve the lethal riddle of a mountain once deemed indestructible. The answer finally arrived in the form of the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound titan of high-strength steel engineered for the sole purpose of reaching what no other conventional weapon in history could touch. On that fateful morning, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers completed a grueling 37-hour round trip from Whiteman Air Force Base, performing a feat of global logistics and psychological endurance that no other military on the planet could hope to replicate. They did not simply bomb the mountain. They threaded 5 massive munitions down a primary ventilation shaft at speeds exceeding 1,000 feet per second, creating an internal shockwave that shattered high-precision centrifuges 260 feet below the solid rock surface. Simultaneously, the largest strike formation in the history of the Israeli Air Force, dubbed Genesis, systematically dismantled Iran's integrated air defense network with cold, mechanical efficiency. Within minutes, advanced surface-to-air systems, including the Russian-built S-300, were blinded and neutralized, allowing 500 targets to be struck across the country without a single Allied aircraft being lost to enemy fire. This precision was not limited to hardware. It was a total, calculated decapitation of the military leadership. The Israel Defense Forces confirmed the elimination of Abdul Rahim Mousavi, the Iranian Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, along with 7 members of the top security leadership and 40 senior commanders. This was a pace of destruction that allowed for no recovery and no orderly transfer of command. Even as Iranian state media desperately attempted to project a sense of control by promising a video speech from the supreme leader that never materialized, the physical reality of the regime's collapse was becoming undeniable to those on the ground. The deception leading to this moment was as complex and layered as the strike itself. For weeks, the administration maintained a carefully constructed facade of diplomatic optimism, utilizing Omani mediation and public negotiations in Geneva to keep the Iranian leadership tethered to a false sense of safety. Inside Israel, cabinet ministers were given classified red phones and strictly instructed to maintain their absolute daily routines to avoid any suspicion of an impending war. Misleading reports about American aircraft movements at the Uvda base drew Iranian surveillance assets south, deliberately pulling their gaze away from the true strike corridors. The result was a regime caught entirely off guard in the middle of a Saturday morning meeting, unaware that their entire command structure was being erased from existence in half a minute. As communication networks across Iran suddenly dropped by 50% and the country's airspace was slammed shut, the Islamic Republic found itself trapped in a total black hole of control. The question that now haunts global intelligence agencies is whether this unprecedented shock will lead to a rapid hardening of the remaining Revolutionary Guard elements or a final, chaotic collapse under the weight of its own severed head. The physical decapitation of the leadership has left a vacuum that is being filled by 2 opposing forces: the raw, long-suppressed anger of the Iranian people and the desperate regrouping of the regime's survivors. For decades, the Islamic Republic maintained control through a multi-layered system of repression, but the sheer scale of the joint strikes has shaken the very foundation of this authority. In the streets of Tehran and across 24 of Iran's 31 provinces, the silence of the morning was shattered not only by missiles but by the sounds of a populace at a crossroads. Verified videos emerging through the digital blackout show ordinary Iranians cheering in the streets, chanting death to the dictator, and celebrating the fall of a man who had overseen the slaughter of 32,000 protesters in the preceding months. This is the hour of freedom that the American president spoke of, yet it is a freedom born of fire and uncertainty. While many celebrate, the remnants of the regime are far from surrender. Ali Larijani, a former parliament speaker and the head of the Supreme National Security Council, has emerged as the man to watch in this existential crisis. Having survived the initial strikes, Larijani is now the most senior civilian official standing, desperately attempting to coordinate a response from the ruins of a government. He has promised an unforgettable lesson to those he calls the Zionists and the Americans, signaling that the Islamic Republic will seek to drag this conflict out rather than face a quick collapse. The regime is banking on its deep-seated infrastructure of fear, particularly the Basij militia and the remaining echelons of the Revolutionary Guard, who have spent 47 years preparing for exactly this type of total war. The concern in Western capitals is that, instead of a rapid democratic transition, the pressure will cause the regime to harden into a purely military religious dictatorship with even fewer restraints than before. Beyond the borders of Iran, the axis of resistance that took decades to build is cracking under the strain. Hezbollah, once the premier deterrent against Israeli action, finds its leadership decapitated and its firepower significantly degraded after years of relentless pressure. Though the group still possesses thousands of rockets, their will appears shaken, and they face the prospect of total destruction should they fully enter the fray. Similarly, the Houthis in Yemen, despite their fiery rhetoric and threats to renew attacks in the Red Sea, are teetering on the brink of bankruptcy and fear the heavy price of a renewed air campaign against their own infrastructure. This isolation of Tehran is a historic window of opportunity, yet it is complicated by the regime's ability to fight asymmetrically. The threat to the Strait of Hormuz remains the ultimate lever, with naval mines and anti-ship missiles positioned to choke off 20% of the world's oil supply. As global markets price in a shooting war across 7 countries, the world is discovering that while air power can remove a leader, it cannot easily erase a 47-year-old system designed for survival at any cost. The global community is currently witnessing a tectonic shift in the geopolitical order that has stood since the late 20th century. As the strikes continue, international powers are forced to make choices that were unthinkable only days ago. China, which serves as a vital economic lifeline for Iran by importing 1.7 million barrels of crude oil every single day, issued a stunning and urgent directive for its citizens to flee the country immediately. This move by Beijing, coupled with a similar warning to Chinese nationals in Israel, underscores a global recognition that the probability of a multi-week regional war has shifted from possible to likely. The United Kingdom has also taken the drastic step of temporarily withdrawing its diplomatic staff from Tehran, signaling that London no longer believes in the viability of the diplomatic backchannels that have historically prevented a total collapse of order. In Washington, the political landscape is equally turbulent. While some members of the Republican Party, like Senator Lindsey Graham, herald this as a violent but necessary opportunity to reshape the Middle East, others are voicing deep constitutional concerns. Congressman Thomas Massie has labeled the mission an unauthorized act of war, noting that the president did not seek the required congressional approval before launching the most consequential military operation in decades. The skepticism extends to the intelligence community, where reports suggest that President Trump's claims regarding an imminent threat from Iranian intercontinental ballistic missiles are not supported by current United States assessments, which previously estimated such a capability was at least 9 years away. Senator Mark Warner has even compared the current rhetoric to the lead-up to the Iraq War, demanding a clear articulation of the administration's long-term objectives. Vice President J.D. Vance has attempted to quell fears of another forever war by stating there is no chance the United States will be mired in a years-long conflict. The administration's gamble rests on the concept of peace through strength, believing that a surgical, albeit massive, air campaign can topple a regime that has survived decades of sanctions. This strategy assumes that the Iranian people will seize this moment of weakened control to overthrow their rulers, a proposition that many experts find risky given the hundreds of thousands of Revolutionary Guard and Basij militia members who remain armed and committed to the regime's survival. The shifting loyalties of the Gulf Arab states represent the final, most complex piece of this strategic puzzle. Publicly, nations like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have issued strong condemnations of the violence and called for an immediate ceasefire. However, behind the scenes, the reality is far more nuanced. Reports indicate that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and other regional leaders have been in constant communication with the White House, privately urging the United States to finally confront the head of the snake. These nations have for years balanced a public desire for stability with a private hope for the removal of the Iranian threat. Now, with their own cities under fire and their economies at risk, that balance has been destroyed. Oman, ever the neutral mediator, is making a final attempt to pull the world back from the brink. Foreign Minister Badr al-Basidi is traveling to Washington to meet with the Vice President, carrying whatever remains of a diplomatic off-ramp. But with 2 carrier strike groups in position and the coordinates of every major Iranian facility already programmed into American and Israeli munitions, the time for words is rapidly expiring. The smoke rising from the ruins of Tehran marks more than just the end of a military engagement. It signifies the potential conclusion of an era that has held the Middle East in a grip of fear for 47 years. Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion have systematically dismantled the command and control of a regime that many believed was untouchable. With Ayatollah Ali Khamenei confirmed dead and 40 of his most senior commanders eliminated, the Islamic Republic as the world once knew it has functionally ceased to exist. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that the tyrant's plan to annihilate the State of Israel is now a relic of the past. However, as the initial shock of these decapitation strikes fades, the world is left to confront the haunting question of the day after. The survival of the Iranian regime was never based on a single man, but on a complex, multi-layered system designed to withstand exactly this type of assault. While the head has been severed, the body continues to lash out, and the true extent of the damage to Iran's nuclear program remains a matter of fierce debate. Beneath the collapsed mountains of Fordo and Natanz, the status of the centrifuges is still unknown. Intelligence confirms that 400 kilograms of uranium, enriched to 60% purity, was moved on 16 trucks just 3 days before the American bunker busters arrived. That lethal material is now hidden in unknown locations, waiting for a new leadership to decide whether to push toward the final 90% threshold of weapons-grade material. The human cost of this strategic victory is a scar that may take generations to heal. The ruins of the girls' school in Minab, where 108 children were reportedly killed, serve as a grim reminder that in modern warfare, it is the civilians who pay the ultimate price. Across the Gulf, the residents of Dubai and Abu Dhabi are left to piece together their shattered sense of security after Iranian missiles struck luxury hotels and residential districts. In Tehran, while some celebrate the downfall of their oppressors, others huddle in fear, waiting to see if the surviving echelons of the Revolutionary Guard will clamp down with even greater brutality, or if the people will finally seize the generational opportunity President Trump has placed before them. As the United Nations Security Council meets in emergency session and the Strait of Hormuz remains a closed choke point for the world's energy supply, the geopolitical geometry of the region is being redrawn. If a more modern, pro-Western leadership can emerge from the wreckage, the Middle East may finally see the return of the Abraham Accords and a period of enduring peace. But if the remaining radicalized elements of the regime choose a war of attrition, this may only be the beginning of a more dangerous phase of global instability. For now, the bombers have returned to their carriers. The sirens have quieted in Tel Aviv, and a weary world watches the horizon for the next move in a game where the stakes are nothing less than the future of civilization.